having a sense of purpose and this feeling that there is a sacred purpose for everyone's life, and really just discovering what our mission is the point of life, right? Just figuring out what it is that we're here to work through and to conquer. And I love this because for me, it's like, hey, this is self-development, right? This is us trying to evolve to this higher version of ourself, evolve out of that human animal state into connecting with the higher consciousness that's inside of us. Hi friends, before we start today's show, I want to take a moment to tell you about our question and comment line. So if you have any questions or you want to discuss anything related to the topics we cover on the show, such as personal development, health, sobriety, life goals, therapy, feel free to leave a message on our new line. So here's the number below. You can call, ask your question, or leave your comment. So it's easy and straightforward. And it's really my way of connecting with you and making you part of the show. So please leave me a message and you might hear your voice in our next episode. So you can either share your name or remain anonymous, however you're comfortable. But if you believe you're experiencing some kind of emergency, please contact a qualified healthcare professional or 911. So I'm excited to hear from you and to continue this journey of self-development with all of you. Hi friends, welcome back. Now today we're talking about something that might seem a little strange, but trust me when I say that this ties into self-development in such a powerful way. And so the subject is near-death experiences. And if you've never heard this term, it was actually coined back in 1975 by Raymond Moody, who came out with the book Life After Life. And after that, many different researchers and authors and doctors have studied, written books about this whole phenomenon called near-death experiences. And so this is when somebody dies or physically dies or almost dies, and they have an experience of the beginning of an afterlife, and then they, of course, come back into their body and live to tell about it. So I've kind of gone down a rabbit hole in recent months, and I have read, I think I'm up to about 30 books on the subject because it's just caught my interest. And so I keep reading book after book, and I'm really fascinated. There's a lot of layers to it. But there is a specific book that I want to share with you today, and for good reason, because this is a show about self-development. And in this episode, I'm going to share how the near-death experience is maybe the greatest self-development tool on the planet. And while you and I can't necessarily have one, what can we learn from those who have? And so that is the subject of this book. This is written by Kenneth Ring, PhD. And Kenneth Ring is actually he's a professor. He was a professor. And he's the one who did the first actual study on near-death experiences. So Raymond Moody's book came out in 1975, and this was more like he collected all these stories from people, and he kind of found some similarities and kind of just put it out there and created the whole term near-death experience, because while it is something that's been around, it's been studied throughout history or talked about throughout history, there wasn't really a term for it. And so, of course, after the book, since it was so popular, many people were questioning, is this legitimate? How can we really know? And so Kenneth Ring has written several books on the subject, and he actually did scientific studies. And then that led to teaching classes at a university for many years. And so this book he wrote specifically, it's called Lessons from the Light. What can we learn from the near-death experience? So after decades and decades of interviewing people who've had these incredible experiences, he started to notice how all of their lives changed. And not only they're all changing in different ways, they all changed in the same way. And so it's completely fascinating. First of all, it's just cool to listen to all the stories. But then when he pulls together all of these elements that these transformative elements in how they live their life today, right? They died or almost died, but they're back here and they're living today. And how are they living? And how they're all so much happier and have so much more meaning in their life. So I've got some cliff notes for you, but if any of this interests you, or if like me, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. This is the book that I absolutely recommend people start with if they want to start reading about near-death experiences. And really the reason is because Ken makes it really about us. Like, what can we learn? So let's dive in. And before we really get into this, what are the takeaways? Like, how can we live better and have more connection, more peace, more happiness in our life from the lessons that people have learned? I want to explain or just share some of the elements of a near-death experience. So for me, before I started reading all this stuff a couple of months ago, I really didn't know anything about near-death experiences. Some of it, we see in movies, or we actually kind of have little sayings like, my life flashed before my eyes, or like, I saw the light, right? So it's almost like in our vernacular, in our culture, to say some of these things that actually do come from people's real near-death experiences. So there's about 8 different elements, and most people don't have all 8 of them. Some of them do. And there's, of course, if you get into the reading about this, there's all kinds of different studies where you can learn, what percentage of people have this element or that element. And that's all fascinating. But just the overall picture. So when someone is about to have this near-death experience, a lot of the time it starts with like a buzzing or a ringing that they feel. And then the first element to really kick in is just this overwhelming sense of peace and painlessness. And then there's an out-of-body element a lot of the time. So if someone, wherever they are, let's say if they're in a hospital bed, they get the sense that they are now like floating up above the bed. And now they can look down and they can identify, oh, that's my body. And so at this point, they kind of get the sense like, oh, I must be dead because my body's down there. I'm up here. I don't have any pain. I feel just this amazing sense of peace. And so things are kind of clicking at that point. The next element that a lot of people have is the tunnel with the light at the end of it. So just this feeling of like, okay, now I'm not near my body anymore. I'm being pulled down this tunnel. There's this big, beautiful light that, a lot of these things that you learn about near-death experiences is that people are saying like, we don't have language to describe really how it is. So they use the word light, but they're like, it's not like any light you've ever seen. It's brighter, but it doesn't hurt your eyes. And it's, there's difficulty in describing really even what this experience is. At this point, oftentimes there's the knowledge that there's beings around them. And quite often it's people that they have loved who have gone on before them. Sometimes it could be a religious figure, but there's people around them, and there's exchanges not through words, but almost just like telepathically. There's information that's shared and, communication that happens. Then there's this experience of the light. And so this is, the being of light, which, of course, oftentimes we will refer to as God, or, all the different religions have different names for God. But for people who have this near-death experience, it's just this being, and it's light. And then there's just this overwhelming sense of love and acceptance that this light is like emanating to them. The next part, which is super cool, is called the life review. And so for a lot of people who have a near-death experience, there's a point in the experience where they see their entire life. And the way some of them describe it is so incredible that not only are they re-experiencing their entire life, but they can experience the emotions of other people in different situations in their life. There was a guy whose story was so incredible. He shared one of the things that came up in his life review was a day when he got into a fight with just a random guy who, like kind of ran into his car, was like stumbling. A drunk guy was stumbling through the crosswalk, and it escalated to this fist fight. And he says when he went back in his life review, he experienced it from that guy's perspective. And he had all this knowledge, like, of the fact that this man had just lost his wife. He had been drinking, and he experienced getting hit. And he's like, I hit him 32 times. And he experienced all of that. He experienced all the emotions. And so this idea of a life review, it's almost like you're seeing everything, you're experiencing the emotions both on your side, and then the consequences and the impact that everything you did in life had on those around you. And some of it is good, some of it is not good. And you're viewing it with this being of light. And everybody who has described this has said that there's never a feeling of judgment. There's certainly uncomfortable emotions when you see some of the things that, you've said and done, and the impact, like really, truly understanding the impact that those things have had on other people in your life, right? Because we're so good at denial, and we're so good at like putting up blinders. But in this life review, like, hey, you get to feel how they felt, right? And then the next part of this near-death experience is this reluctance to come back, right? So you're in this place where you have this peace and this love and this light, and then this just understanding of the universe and understanding of like, the meaning behind everything that you're getting from the light and you're just experiencing. And so this reluctance, but then also this knowledge of like, what I'm here on earth to do is not done. So I need to go back. So that's just sort of like in a very like short, quick nutshell, some of the elements that somebody who has a near-death experience goes through. And so, Kenneth Ring, having interviewed thousands of people who've had this experience, he's noticing how their lives have changed. So they have this experience, they come back, and then to see, just in simple terms, they have a spiritual awakening, is one way to put it. They have this deeper understanding of life. They have more love, and just this deeper connection to our human potential, which, with this show, that's really what we're all about, is how do we tap into our human potential, right? How do we push the limits of it? This potential that we have to experience joy, to be in connection with others around us, and then to be able to feel peace, right? We talk a lot about mental health and feeling good in our physical body and all of that together, right? And so, just noticing how Ken did that these people who have this experience of a near-death experience, they come back and it's almost like they had a super condensed self-development workshop that gave them all the same outcome. Okay, so back to the book, Lessons from the Light. What can we learn about these near-death experiences, and what is that shared psychological profile that these people who have had NDEs share once they come back? And so it's their beliefs, their behaviors, their values, and their worldview kind of like align with one another in a really interesting way. So this is a list from Lessons from the Light. So the first thing is an appreciation for life. And so in that, just appreciating every moment, being aware of the beauty that surrounds us here on this earth, feeling joy, like experiencing nature and gratitude. So just this overall appreciation for this physical life. And that's something that, we talk about on this show a lot, right? Like, how do we build these moments into our day, into our life, where we're slowing down and we're kind of checking in with ourselves with like, wow, there's so much beauty here. There's so much to appreciate. And so those who have had an NDE come back, and it's just easier for them to just be in that gratitude, be in that appreciation. There's an overwhelming sense of self-acceptance, which is crazy because you think that, most of them went through this experience of a life review where they got to see every mistake they ever made and every, triumph and everything that they've ever done and the impact that that's had on others. And on one hand, you could say that that's probably very humbling. And I don't know about you, but now that I know more about this, every time I have a decision to make, I think like, okay, what do I want to relive when I have my life review? Like, how do I want to treat this person? How do I want to proceed with this decision? But they come back from that with this overwhelming sense of self-acceptance. And I think a lot of that is probably attributed to being in the presence of a being of, total love and acceptance. And to, probably something that here on earth we've never really experienced, what like being completely enveloped in full acceptance and love feels like. And to come back from that, to just be able to fully accept yourself and to love yourself. And that, again, is something that for those of us who've never had a near-death experience, we're just here trying to work on our self-development. That's one of our goals, right? To increase our self-acceptance, to not be so hard on ourselves, right? Another thing is concern for others and really just the desire and the need to be in service of others. And so again, if you think, if you've had this experience where you now know how everything you do impacts other people in a very real way, well, it's really going to change what your real goals are. Because if you know that it matters how you treat every person and the impact, like the ripple effect of everything you do, puts it in perspective of how important it is to really serve others and to do things not for your gain, not for physical gain, but really just for the good of connecting with others and serving others. Having a reverence for life is another thing. So just having a respect and a reverence for physical life, probably knowing how temporary it is. This anti-materialism, so just not caring nearly as much about physical things and almost even feeling like physical things aren't really real, like they're not permanent, they're not of significance when you compare it to other things. This kind of anti-competitiveness. So really seeing that, the way we treat others and the way we care for others matters more than winning, right? Certainly more than cutting others down or doing things to get ourselves ahead of others. So it's a totally different paradigm. A spirituality. So across the board, people who have had this near-death experience, they do not come back and become religious, like within a certain doctrine, but they become spiritual. So just more connected with that love and that light that they experienced when they were dead. Having a quest for knowledge. And I love this one because a lot of them say that this learning and this ability to take in new knowledge continues into the next life. And so they come back and they're hungry to learn. And this is one I can totally relate to, because sometimes I'm like, why do I read so much? Why am I like, I just have this curiosity, like I can't stop. And so it's cool to know that this is something that, people who have experienced the afterlife, they value knowledge. They value that. Having a sense of purpose and this feeling that there is a sacred purpose for everyone's life, and really just discovering what our mission is the point of life, right? Just figuring out what it is that we're here to work through and to conquer. And I love this because for me, it's like, hey, this is self-development, right? This is us trying to evolve to this higher version of ourself, evolve out of that human animal state into connecting with the higher consciousness that's inside of us. Not having a fear of death, and that is across the board. Everyone that Kenneth has interviewed who's had a near-death experience is not afraid to die. It doesn't mean that they're excited about dying in the future or that they're not afraid of having pain when they die. But as far as like what happens after you die, across the board, they're excited and they're not afraid. And for so many of us, just having this fear of death is kind of like underlies a lot of our life. And so the ironic thing is that when that fear of death goes away, it's almost like you realize that it was also sort of a fear of really living. So it's almost like there's this permission now to really live, knowing that in the end, there's going to be peace and there's going to be love. A belief in life after death. And that's another one that across the board, having experienced that, they are completely convicted that their consciousness continues after the physical body dies. And I think that contributes a lot to the lack of fear when it comes to death. And this is something that's super interesting because it's one of those facts that are still very hotly debated. And another book that I've been reading, this is Bruce Greyson, and he has also done a whole bunch of studies on the whole near-death experience and a lot of things surrounding that. And they have proof where like somebody is in the hospital, they have 0 brainwaves, they're in a deep coma, and they can recount things that were happening in various places in the hospital when they were out because they were having that out-of-body experience. And, one of the examples was this is Dr. Bruce Greyson, when he was like an intern, and there was a woman, she's in a coma in the hospital room, and he goes to the waiting room to talk to her roommate and get some information and things like that. And a little detail, like he had a big stain on his tie from his lunch that he was kind of trying to cover up, and then he was like moving the fan and talking to the roommate. And the next day when he comes back to speak to the patient who was now awake and had brainwaves and all of that, she tells him exactly what the conversation was in the waiting room, and then that fact that he had a stain on his tie and things like that, where he's like, wait a minute, like, you had no brain activity. And she's like, yeah, well, I was out of my body and I, could see and hear everything. So anyways, that's just one of the things that people use to prove it scientifically that consciousness can exist separate from the physical body. But people who've had the experience of the NDE don't need any of that because they've experienced it. So for them, 100%, there's consciousness that continues after death. And then finally, just a belief in God or a belief in this being of light and love across the board. All of those who have had the NDE just have this because they've experienced it. So just wanted to go over, these really cool takeaways from Lessons from the Light. Really recommend it as a self-development book. It's crazy to see the ways that we can come upon self-development. And when there's this phenomenon that, maybe 5% of the population will experience, and maybe we're not part of that 5%, we can still learn and we can still get little clues to the bigger picture, right? And we can apply those to our life. And ultimately, it can open us up to more life, open us up to more joy and connection and peace, better mental health, and ultimately a higher level of self-development. So highly recommend reading Lessons from the Light. And who knows, maybe it'll start a rabbit hole for you, like it has for me, of just reading a bunch of books and different people's accounts of what they've experienced. And it just really opens us up to possibilities. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. And I will be back next week with another message.